So here we are, and we've got our mallet head all ready to go. We've got our holes drilled into it, our angles put on, and the next step is of course to get this dowel in these dowel joints. Now there are a few different ways to do this, but I like to start by shortening my dowel to correct length. So for this, we want to have a little bit of overhang, so we want it to come through and hang over. We don't want to be hitting it right and flush, because if there's any issues with the end splitting out or breaking, you're going to have a harder time trying to fix that up and hide that. So let's keep going. First thing we need to go through and do is know how wide our piece is. Now our piece is sitting at approximately 65, it's 64 millimeters for me. So I want to cut a piece that is 75 millimeters. Now I'm giving myself heaps of excess here, and I like to be intentional with that. So let's come through, let's get that pencil, let's grab our marker here, and I'm going to set that to 75 mils, as you can see, and I'm going to come through and just mark this on at 75 mil. Now it might be super tempting to go ahead and try and mark them all up at once, but as always guys, if we're cutting multiple, mark one, cut one, and repeat that process. Guys, the next thing we're going to come through and do is of course get everything ready for the dowel joint glue up. First things first, you got to go through, have your dowels. You need your mallet head with pre-drilled holes. You need some glue, you need a rag. I like to have some scrap timber to make sure that if I'm hitting the dowels into it, I'm just not going to go through into my bench. Here I've got a bit of cork flooring, but you could really use whatever you want. And finally, you need your trusty mallet. So let's get cracking. I'm going to place this timber down, grab my rag, and for this one, it doesn't really matter where you do with it, but I probably wouldn't want it underneath my project right now because this is scrap, so I can just throw glue straight onto there. From here, I'm going to grab my glue, and I'm going to use a bit of time now to add glue to these dowels. Now, once again, go ahead and use something to spread your glue. I'm going to use the spreader God gave me, but if you don't have one of those, or you'd rather not use one of those, go ahead and of course use something else. I'm going to come through and I'm spreading this all around. Now I'm going to get some glue on there. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to come through. I'm then going to grab my rag and wipe my hands off. Now I'm going to do some nice mallet hits through there, and that glue will eventually fill that in and sort that out. I'm going to keep going with that same system. So now one thing you see people do quite often when they're doing this is they go through and they really whack it down hard, and they end up breaking apart this head, and it looks really bad. So there should be light taps until it goes the whole way through. So it really shouldn't be over the top hitting your dowel, because otherwise you are going to split that head and it looks really bad, and you can never really truly fix it. You can try and cut it off or break it off, but it's never the same. So really you want to go through and make sure that you are not giving it a solid whack at all. So guys, we're going through, we've got our dowel joints ready to go. The next step is of course to come through and cut those off. But before we do that, I need to take a moment to speak to you about something very important. Now, Clarence McDaniel is an absolute legend, and I just want to give a shout out to him. Thank you very much for always watching my videos, always being there, always encouraging, and just always being a champion. Clarence, this goes out to you all the way in Texas. Alrighty guys, we are back into it, and let's go ahead and cut some of these off. So you want to come through, grab yourself a tenon saw or a dovetail saw, and right now you're just cutting off the majority of excess. As you can see here, I've gone through and I haven't cut right up next to the thing because I don't have a flush trim saw here. So I'm going to go through and cut off just these excess pieces where I can. Using a bench hook makes your life a whole lot easier, because you can come through and just cut and have it not go anywhere. So we've got our 4 pieces like this now. It's looking pretty good. We're going to jump over there to the linisher. So the very first thing you need for this step is of course some safety glasses on. Then you need your piece, and you need all of your long hair, bangles, jewelry, rings, anything like that taken off and removed or tied up into a tight bun for that long hair. The next step is to go through, and it is of course to sand down these across here. Now for this, I would not recommend using the disc sander. The disc sander is a little bit too aggressive in the way that it cuts, and it's also going to leave you sanding marks going this way along, which then you have to sand out again. So if you don't have your access to a big linisher or belt sander there, what I'm going to recommend you go through and do is, of course, go ahead and use a sanding board. And so they're those boards of plywood with the sandpaper glued down onto it. Get some with like an 80 grit and just sand it off. It's going to go pretty quickly. But since I've got access to one of these, I'm just going to use this and get straight into it. So I'm over here at the linisher, and as you can see, we're going to just throw this bad boy on and get it done. Now, as you can see here, we're looking pretty tidy, and on most sides, it's really nice and tight, but there's a couple of joints here where it's just not perfect. And I'm hoping these show up on camera, but there's a couple of sections there. Now, it's easy enough fix to this. So what we're gonna come through and do is we're gonna come through and get a little bit of glue here, and we're just gonna dab the smallest amount in that general area. Okay, very small amount. The next step is to get your self-holding sanding block, as seen in previous videos, and come through and sand that off. So we're actually trying to sand in parts of the grain into the into those holes. Now, by doing that, it's gone ahead and it's filled all those holes up, any of those gaps up, with sawdust and a little bit of glue to hold that in place. And so that's going to mean that you're no longer seeing any of those tiny little holes, which is super pro.